Imagine opening a restaurant that willingly gives up one of the busiest business days every single week. No Sunday sales. No last-minute customers. No extra holiday revenue. By every traditional business rule, that decision should be a disaster. Yet somehow, the company behind that decision became one of the most profitable fast food chains in America. And that's just the beginning. If you've ever driven past a Chick-fil-A around lunchtime, you've probably seen the same thing. Cars wrapped around the building. Employees weaving through traffic with tablets in hand. A drive-thru that somehow looks chaotic, yet moves surprisingly fast. From the outside, it looks like any other successful fast food chain. But almost everything about Chick-fil-A's business model breaks the industry's rules. While competitors constantly introduce new burgers, limited-time offers, and oversized menus to attract customers, Chick-fil-A built its empire by doing the exact opposite. It chose simplicity. Its signature chicken sandwich has barely changed since it was introduced in 1967. A hand-breaded chicken breast. 2 pickles. A buttered toasted bun, that's it. In an industry obsessed with offering more, Chick-fil-A discovered that doing fewer things exceptionally well can be far more powerful. A smaller menu doesn't just make ordering easier. It speeds up the kitchen, improves consistency, reduces waste, and allows employees to perfect the products they make every single day. Customers know exactly what to expect. And that's exactly what keeps them coming back. Of course, great food alone doesn't explain why Chick-fil-A consistently ranks among America's favorite fast food chains. The real advantage begins long before your order reaches the kitchen. Watch any Chick-fil-A drive-thru closely. Instead of waiting for customers to reach a speaker, employees walk directly to cars with handheld tablets, taking orders while vehicles are still moving through the line. By removing one of the biggest bottlenecks in fast food, the ordering process, the company serves more customers without dramatically expanding its restaurants. The result isn't just shorter wait times. It's a smoother experience. One that feels surprisingly personal, even when hundreds of people are waiting. That attention to detail extends far beyond the drive-thru. Unlike most fast food giants, Chick-fil-A doesn't sell restaurants to wealthy investors looking to own dozens of locations. In fact, it does the opposite. The company owns every restaurant itself. The people running them aren't traditional franchise owners. They're operators. Every year, thousands apply. Only a tiny fraction are selected after an extensive interview process that can take more than a year. Why make it so difficult? Because Chick-fil-A isn't looking for people with the deepest pockets. It's looking for leaders. People who can build strong teams, maintain consistent quality, and become part of the communities they serve. The company would rather have one exceptional operator than 10 average investors. That philosophy gives Chick-fil-A something most competitors struggle to maintain as they grow. Consistency. Whether you're ordering in Georgia, Texas, California, or New York, the experience feels almost identical. But perhaps the boldest decision in the company's history isn't its menu, or its franchise model. It's what happens every Sunday. Every single Chick-fil-A closes its doors. No exceptions. For a company generating billions in annual sales, voluntarily shutting down one day every week sounds almost irrational. But founder Truett Cathy believed long-term success wasn't built by squeezing every possible dollar out of every possible day. He believed people performed better when they had time to rest. That single decision became part of the company's identity. Customers don't just remember Chick-fil-A because of its chicken. They remember what it stands for. If Chick-fil-A proved that doing less could create $1 billion business, Costco proved something even stranger. Imagine opening a store and charging people just to walk through the front door. For most retailers, that idea sounds ridiculous. Why would anyone pay for the privilege of shopping? Yet every year, millions of people do exactly that. And surprisingly, that membership fee is the foundation of Costco's entire business. Walking into a Costco doesn't feel like entering a normal supermarket. There are no polished displays. No carefully arranged shelves. No relaxing background music. Instead, you're greeted by towering stacks of products sitting on shipping pallets inside what looks more like a warehouse than a retail store. At first glance, it almost feels unfinished. But nothing inside Costco is accidental. Every detail is designed around one goal: keeping prices as low as possible. Even something as simple as leaving products on pallets saves thousands of hours of labor every year. Employees don't waste time stocking shelves one item at a time. They simply move entire pallets onto the sales floor. It may not look elegant, but it's incredibly efficient. And those savings eventually reach the customer. That's because Costco follows one rule that almost every retailer breaks. It refuses to make big profits on the products it sells. Most retailers rely on product markups to make money. Costco doesn't. Instead, it keeps margins incredibly thin, often around 10 to 11%, far below what many traditional retailers charge. So if Costco isn't making much money from the products, where does the profit come from? The membership. That's the real business. Once customers pay to join, something fascinating happens. Shopping stops feeling like spending. It starts feeling like saving. Every bargain feels like proof that the membership was worth it. Psychologists call this commitment bias. Once we've paid to be part of something, we're naturally motivated to get our money's worth. Costco quietly turns that instinct into one of the most successful retail strategies ever created. But getting customers inside the store is only half the battle. The next challenge is keeping them there. That's why Costco intentionally feels a little unpredictable. Products constantly move. Limited time deals appear without warning. And many items disappear forever once they're sold out. You might walk in for toothpaste and leave with a kayak. Not because you planned to buy one, but because you convinced yourself that if you didn't buy it today, you might never see that deal again. Retail experts call this the treasure hunt. Costco calls it another successful shopping day. That same philosophy explains why Costco carries only about 3,700 products. Compare that to a typical supermarket, which can stock well over 40,000. Less choice may sound like a disadvantage. In reality, it's one of Costco's greatest strengths. Fewer products mean larger orders from suppliers, stronger negotiating power, faster inventory turnover, and lower prices for customers. Instead of offering 10 different versions of the same product, Costco finds one that it believes offers the best value. Then buys so much of it that suppliers have little choice but to lower their prices. Eventually, Costco realized something else. If it couldn't find the quality it wanted, it would simply make the product itself. That's how Kirkland's signature was born. Today, Kirkland isn't viewed as a cheap store brand. For many shoppers, it's the reason they walk into Costco in the first place. Whether it's olive oil, batteries, coffee, clothing, or paper towels, the Kirkland name has become shorthand for one simple promise: high quality. Without the premium price. And that's exactly what Costco has been selling all along. Not groceries. Not televisions. Not giant jars of peanut butter. Trust. Because once people believe a store consistently saves them money, they don't just shop there. They keep paying for the privilege of coming back. Costco built loyalty by charging customers before they ever filled a shopping cart. But one coffee chain quietly holds billions of dollars that customers voluntarily deposit before ordering a single drink. Starbucks took that idea one step further. It convinced millions of people to hand over their money, before they even decided what they wanted to drink. And in doing so, it accidentally started operating like a bank. Every day, millions of people open the Starbucks app without giving it a second thought. They reload $20. Maybe $50. Some even set it to refill automatically whenever the balance gets low. It feels completely normal. But think about what's actually happening. Customers are voluntarily giving Starbucks billions of dollars, before receiving a single cup of coffee. That's money Starbucks gets to hold while customers decide when, or if, they'll spend it. At any given time, those prepaid balances add up to billions of dollars. If Starbucks were a bank, it would rank among some of the largest in America. And unlike a traditional bank, people willingly deposit that money themselves. No paperwork. No interest. No questions asked. But the money is only part of the story. The real value comes from what Starbucks learns every time you open the app. It knows which drinks you order, when you buy them, which store you visit, how often you come back, and even which promotions are most likely to tempt you into making another purchase. Most coffee shops sell coffee. Starbucks sells coffee, while quietly collecting one of the most valuable customer databases in retail. That data helped transform the company from a neighborhood cafe into a technology-driven business. Long before mobile ordering became common, Starbucks invested heavily in its app. Today, millions of customers skip the line entirely by ordering before they even arrive. For customers, it's convenience. For Starbucks, it's something even more valuable. Speed. Every second saved means more drinks served during the busiest hours of the day. More customers. More revenue. Without opening another store. But convenience alone wouldn't build the kind of loyalty Starbucks enjoys today. The company understood something else. People rarely ask for a coffee. They ask for their coffee. Extra shot. Oat milk. No foam. Light ice. Extra caramel. Half sweet. Over the years, Starbucks turned customization into one of its biggest competitive advantages. No two drinks have to be the same. That simple idea transformed a basic cup of coffee into something personal. And when a product feels personal, customers are far less likely to replace it. Of course, creating hundreds of thousands of possible drink combinations also makes Starbucks far more complicated to operate. Every customized order takes more time, requires more ingredients, and places greater pressure on baristas. It's the trade-off Starbucks willingly accepts. Because personalization allows the company to charge premium prices for products that often cost only a fraction of what customers pay. As consumer habits changed, Starbucks changed with them today. Starbucks isn't simply competing with the coffee shop down the street. It's competing for a place in your daily routine. Because once your morning starts with Starbucks, changing that habit becomes surprisingly difficult. And in business, few things are more valuable than becoming part of someone's everyday life. If Starbucks mastered your daily routine, there is a furniture retailer made people build their own products, and customers ended up loving them even more because of it. IKEA mastered something even more surprising. It convinced millions of customers to do part of the company's job, and somehow made them happier because of it. Imagine walking into a furniture store. You choose a bookshelf. Pay for it. Carry a heavy box to your car. Drive it home. Spend the next 2 hours trying to understand instructions that barely use words. By the end, you've probably questioned your life choices at least once. Yet somehow, instead of regretting the purchase, people often end up loving the furniture even more. That isn't an accident. It's psychology. For decades, furniture was considered luxury, large, expensive, and incredibly difficult to transport. Buying a sofa or a wardrobe wasn't an impulse decision. It was a long-term investment. Then IKEA asked a simple question. What if furniture didn't have to leave the factory fully assembled? That single idea changed the entire industry. Instead of shipping bulky furniture filled with empty space, IKEA flattened everything into compact boxes. At first glance, it seems like a minor packaging decision. In reality, it transformed the economics of furniture. Flat-packed products take up far less space in trucks. Warehouses can store more inventory. Transportation becomes dramatically cheaper. Customers can fit furniture into their own cars instead of paying for expensive delivery. And those savings add up long before the product ever reaches your living room. Of course, there's one catch. Someone still has to assemble it. That someone is you. Most companies would see this as a disadvantage. IKEA turned it into one of its greatest strengths. Researchers even gave it a name. People tend to place a higher value on things they helped create. The effort itself makes the product feel more meaningful. That slightly crooked bookshelf. Those drawers that took 3 attempts to install, they aren't just pieces of furniture anymore. They're your accomplishment. Walking through an IKEA rarely feels like shopping. That IT feels like wandering through dozens of fully furnished homes. Living rooms flow into bedrooms. Bedrooms become kitchens. Kitchens become offices. Every display quietly answers the same question: what could your home look like? By the time customers reach the warehouse, they aren't simply buying a table. They're buying the lifestyle they imagined while walking through the showroom. Even the famous winding layout serves a purpose. Unlike traditional furniture stores where you head straight for the item you need, IKEA encourages exploration. Every turn reveals another room. Another idea. Another product you never planned to buy. It's less of a shortcut, and more of a carefully designed journey. Then, somewhere in the middle of all that shopping, there's a restaurant. Swedish meatballs. Cinnamon buns. Ice cream. At first, it feels completely unrelated. But it's another surprisingly clever decision. Furniture shopping is exhausting. Hungry customers leave sooner. Comfortable customers stay longer. A simple meal gives people a reason to slow down, recharge, and continue exploring the store. Products shouldn't just look beautiful. They should be functional, affordable, easy to manufacture, easy to transport, and accessible to as many people as possible. That's why IKEA became more than a furniture retailer. It became a design company for everyday life. Today, you'll find IKEA furniture almost everywhere. College dorm rooms, first apartments, family homes, even luxury houses. Not because it's the most expensive, but because it made good design available to people who could never afford it before. In the end, IKEA didn't build the world's largest furniture business by convincing people to work harder. It built it by making customers feel like they built something themselves. Every company we've looked at so far built something. Restaurants, warehouses, coffee shops, furniture stores. Airbnb built something very different. It built one of the world's largest hospitality companies, without owning the hotels. Back in 2008, the timing couldn't have been worse. The global economy was collapsing. People were losing their jobs. Homes were being foreclosed. Travel was slowing down. For most startups, it would have been the worst possible moment to launch. For Airbnb, it became the perfect opportunity. Because the crisis created two completely different problems. Millions of homeowners desperately needed extra income. At the very same time, millions of travelers were searching for cheaper places to stay. Airbnb connected those two groups with one simple idea. What if your spare room could become someone's hotel? That question didn't just create a company. It created an entirely new way of traveling. Unlike traditional hotel chains, Airbnb never had to spend billions constructing buildings. Instead, every new host expanded Airbnb's inventory without the company laying a single brick. That made the business incredibly scalable. As more hosts joined, travelers had more choices. As more travelers booked stays, hosting became even more attractive. One side fueled the other. Economists call this a network effect. The bigger Airbnb became, the easier it became to grow even bigger. Then, years later, the company faced its biggest test. The pandemic. Almost overnight, global travel came to a standstill. Bookings collapsed. Revenue disappeared. For a moment, it looked like Airbnb's greatest strength, travel itself, had become its biggest weakness. Many companies would have waited for the world to return to normal. Airbnb did something different. It noticed that people weren't traveling less. They were traveling differently. Instead of flying across continents, they were driving a few hours away. Instead of weekend vacations, they were booking month-long stays while working remotely. Instead of city apartments, they wanted cabins. Beach houses. Tiny homes. Places with space. Of course, growth came with new challenges. Cities began questioning Airbnb's impact on local housing. Neighbors complained about parties. Governments introduced new regulations. The more successful the platform became, the more responsibility came with it. Airbnb responded by introducing stronger safety measures, improving host verification, restricting high-risk bookings, and working more closely with local governments. The challenges haven't disappeared. But neither has the demand. Because Airbnb was never really competing with hotels. It was competing with something much bigger. The idea that travel had to look the same for everyone. Today, you can spend the night in a treehouse, a castle, a tiny home in the mountains, or an apartment overlooking a city you've never visited before. The destination is only part of the experience. Sometimes, the place you stay becomes the story itself. And that's Airbnb's real innovation. It didn't just change where people sleep. It changed how people think about travel. The biggest opportunities are often hiding inside the ideas that seem impossible at first.